That's my kind of filth. I love it. Joining me now in studio to discuss the new season of Dirty Jobs.
Well, there have been many that I've said, no, I'd rather not do that. But my only job on that show is to try, right? So if I did anything smart in this whole crazy...
When news broke that investigators had been called to Mike Rowe's home, fans immediately feared the worst. The beloved host of Dirty Jobs, known for his humor, humility, and hard work, had always kept his private life tightly guarded. But what was discovered inside his Maryland residence has everyone talking. What began as a simple property inspection turned into something that shocked even the authorities. The man who spent years uncovering America's dirtiest secrets suddenly became the center of a mystery in his own home. Before we reveal what they found, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what comes next will leave you stunned. Mike Rowe's life has always been about authenticity, showing the world the value of hard work and the dignity in getting your hands dirty. But no one expected that his own home would become the setting of a mystery worthy of one of his TV episodes. It all began when neighbors noticed unusual activity around his property. Trucks arrived early in the morning, and by evening, local law enforcement and private specialists were on site. Rumors spread fast. Some said it was a break-in, others whispered about a hidden vault, but the truth was far stranger. When officials entered Mike's house, they were met with a scene that left even the seasoned investigators speechless. The once cozy, well-organized home looked as if someone had been conducting experiments or keeping old artifacts hidden away. Walls were lined with old film reels, handwritten notes, and boxes labeled Confidential Discovery Archives. Each one was tied to past episodes of Dirty Jobs, Somebody's Gotta Do It, and unseen footage never aired on television. What made things more bizarre was that several of these boxes were marked with dates that didn't align with any of Mike's known filming schedules. There were tapes that appeared to document jobs that no record of ever existed. Mines, laboratories, even restricted military sites. Authorities grew increasingly concerned when they found letters tucked behind one of the cabinets. Letters addressed to Mike from people claiming to be whistleblowers, warning him about the dangers of exposing certain industries on television. Investigators at first thought this was simply memorabilia collected over years of filming, but something didn't add up. Every time they opened one box, it seemed to lead to another layer of hidden meaning, like someone had been deliberately hiding evidence of a deeper story. As they continued to dig through the clutter, a locked steel door at the end of his hallway caught their attention. And behind it was where the real shock waited. The steel door wasn't on the original blueprint of Mike Rowe's house. It looked industrial, reinforced with bolts and a digital keypad. At first, the officers thought it was just a personal safe room, something many celebrities quietly install for security. But the lock was more sophisticated than expected, using a two-step verification system with both a numeric code and a fingerprint scanner. When Mike finally arrived home and saw what was happening, he appeared calm, but visibly uneasy. He asked the team to stop filming and requested privacy before allowing anyone near that room. Still, under the supervision of the authorities, the door was opened. Inside was a windowless chamber, dimly lit, lined with soundproof padding and shelves of labeled hard drives, cameras, and hundreds of old notebooks. One wall was covered with pinned photographs of ordinary workers Mike had met during his Dirty Jobs career: miners, fishermen, welders, sanitation crews. But beneath those familiar smiles were annotations, names, dates, and mysterious symbols linking one story to another. One investigator described it as a web of secrets hidden in plain sight. Among the items found was a weathered journal containing Mike's personal notes, entries describing stories the network refused to air, projects that got shut down, and industries that didn't want the truth exposed. Another shelf contained what appeared to be prototypes of strange tools and devices, some built from scrap metal, others still half-assembled. Experts later identified some of these objects as custom-built cameras and air sensors, devices designed to document underground or toxic environments without a crew present. But the most disturbing discovery was a single VHS tape labeled in red marker. Episode 0, the job that started it all. When they played it, the footage didn't show a typical job site. Instead, it depicted Mike in a desolate area, standing near what looked like an abandoned facility, his voice low, his expression serious. "Some jobs," he said on the tape, "aren't supposed to be seen." That clip ended abruptly. From that moment, the tone of the investigation changed completely. After the discovery of the mysterious tape, investigators realized they might be dealing with something far beyond a forgotten TV project. The footage was grainy but unsettling. It showed Mike Rowe in a dark tunnel system, wearing protective gear that bore no network logo. Behind him, faint warning signs read, "Restricted Area. Biohazard Clearance Required." The timestamp on the tape predated the first season of Dirty Jobs by nearly 2 years, meaning this footage existed long before his show ever aired. When questioned, Mike hesitated before admitting that before Dirty Jobs, he had been involved in an independent documentary project called The Forgotten Trades. He explained that it was meant to expose dangerous and abandoned industries in rural America, facilities left behind with no accountability. But what he and his team stumbled upon, he claimed, was something he was ordered never to speak about again. As he spoke, his voice cracked slightly. "We found something that wasn't supposed to be there," he said quietly. "Something the public wasn't meant to see." The notebooks from his vault supported his story, filled with entries about sudden funding withdrawals, missing footage, and warnings from anonymous officials. Some pages even mentioned strange phone calls in the middle of the night. Mike had started documenting everything secretly, keeping physical backups hidden at home. But even that wasn't the most shocking part. Behind a false panel inside the same steel room, officers found a small safe. When they cracked it open, they discovered a collection of sealed vials, each marked with coded serial numbers and chemical hazard symbols. Mike insisted they were props from a canceled episode about waste disposal, but the Department of Environmental Safety was called in to test them. Within days, the samples were removed under heavy protection, and the property was temporarily sealed off. Neighbors reported unmarked vans visiting at night, and the local press started circling. Meanwhile, Mike vanished from public view, canceling appearances and staying silent online. Fans began flooding his social media with questions, but his only post was a single sentence: "Truth has a way of surfacing, whether you like it or not." That one post sent his followers into overdrive, trying to piece together what had really been found in his house. The longer Mike stayed silent, the louder the speculation grew. Online forums, fan groups, and even former Dirty Jobs crew members began sharing strange coincidences they'd noticed over the years. Episodes that were suddenly pulled after airing, interviews where Mike seemed distracted, and moments where he hinted at projects that ended for reasons he couldn't discuss. Reporters dug deeper into The Forgotten Trades, the supposed pre-Dirty Jobs documentary, and found traces of its existence in obscure festival catalogs and early production notes. One entry mentioned an episode filmed in rural Pennsylvania involving a decommissioned facility that handled industrial biomaterial. According to rumors, Mike and his small team had accidentally recorded something they weren't supposed to see, something that later disappeared from the final cut. Those who'd worked on the crew were hard to find. Most declined interviews, and 2 reportedly moved overseas not long after the project wrapped. Inside his house, forensic analysts continued to find more unsettling evidence. Hidden behind a bookshelf, they discovered a hard drive labeled Project MR, Archive 7. When decrypted, it contained hundreds of files, emails, voice memos, and unseen footage spanning nearly 2 decades. Many of the clips appeared harmless: deleted dirty jobs segments, travel notes, behind-the-scenes laughs. But others were disturbing: blurred-out industrial sites, distorted voices warning Mike to walk away, and footage of unidentifiable figures tailing him through airports and parking lots. The deeper they went, the more it looked like Mike had been under quiet surveillance for years. Strangely, some of the metadata on the files showed that they had been accessed remotely, long after Mike claimed to have disconnected the devices. Whatever was going on, it was clear that multiple parties were interested in keeping these discoveries buried. By now, the media frenzy was unstoppable. Late-night hosts made jokes, fans defended him fiercely, and conspiracy theorists began calling it the Rowe Files. Yet behind the scenes, insiders whispered that government officials had paid a quiet visit to the Dirty Jobs production office, collecting any leftover archives related to the old tapes. It seemed that whatever Mike had stumbled upon long ago was finally catching up to him. Weeks passed, and the mystery only deepened. Official statements were vague. Authorities claimed they found environmentally sensitive materials in Mike Rowe's home, but offered no further details. Meanwhile, insiders close to the Dirty Jobs crew began leaking bits of information, painting a more chilling picture. One former cameraman, speaking anonymously, claimed that during an early shoot in 2003, Mike had insisted on visiting a closed-down processing plant against the network's wishes. He said he got a letter about it, the cameraman recalled, something about people who disappeared after working there. They filmed for 2 days before abruptly shutting down. The footage never aired. When questioned about it years later, Mike reportedly brushed it off as a story that went nowhere. But now that old footage, along with those sealed vials and Episode 0, made it impossible to dismiss. Back at his home, specialists reviewing the hard drives uncovered encrypted folders that took days to unlock. What they found inside were extensive notes on industrial practices the public never saw: chemical dumping, worker illnesses, and alleged cover-ups stretching across several states. The files weren't just research, they were evidence. Mike had been quietly collecting it for years, using his role as a TV host to get access to restricted sites and talk to workers no journalist could reach. The shocking twist? Many of those people had later gone missing, changed names, or died under suspicious circumstances. As the findings surfaced, Mike finally broke his silence in a private interview with an independent journalist. His tone was somber. "I wanted people to see what happens when honesty meets profit," he said. But some jobs were too dangerous to show. He didn't elaborate further, but hinted that powerful corporations pressured the network to shut down segments that exposed too much. After that interview, Mike withdrew again, reportedly moving to a remote location. Authorities later confirmed that several federal agencies had become involved, not to charge him, but to review the materials he'd gathered. The question on everyone's mind was the same. Had Mike Rowe uncovered something he was never meant to find? Or was he protecting the very people he'd spent his career defending? By the time investigators finished cataloging everything from Mike Rowe's house, they had collected over 4 terabytes of data. dozens of physical artifacts, and an archive of handwritten notes spanning 2 decades. The media was told that environmental and historical documentation had been recovered, but insiders revealed that what they found was far more controversial. Among the materials were taped confessions from whistleblowers who had appeared briefly in early Dirty Jobs episodes, describing unsafe working conditions, illegal dumping of hazardous waste, and even military contracts disguised as civilian projects. Some of the files were marked with strange phrases like Red Sand Dossier and the Lost Pipeline, phrases that appeared nowhere in public records. Each time investigators tried to trace them, the trail vanished into classified documents. Even stranger, audio clips found in the safe included distorted recordings of phone calls, untraceable voices warning Mike to stop asking questions and leave the footage where it belongs. Forensic experts confirmed the timestamps. These calls had been recorded late at night during his filming years. What shocked them most was how meticulously Mike had documented every warning. It was as if he'd known someday the truth would come looking for him. Meanwhile, the Dirty Jobs production team released a cautious statement saying, "Mike Rowe has always sought truth through work. We ask for privacy while authorities conclude their investigation." But fans weren't satisfied. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like "What Mike Found" and "You Rowe Revealed." Even some of his former co-hosts began hinting that Mike knew things the rest of us weren't ready to believe. Journalists tried to contact Mike directly, but his location remained undisclosed. One neighbor from his Maryland neighborhood claimed he returned late one night to collect a single box from the house, then disappeared again. That same week, unmarked vehicles were spotted circling the property, and a private security team sealed the perimeter. Whatever was inside that last box, it was clearly something he didn't trust anyone else with. Some believe it contained the missing pages from his journal. Others think it held proof of a cover-up so big that releasing it would endanger lives. Either way, Mike's silence had now become the loudest part of the story. Then, out of nowhere, Mike Rowe reappeared. After weeks of silence, he posted a cryptic video message titled, "A Few Things You Should Know." It wasn't flashy, just Mike sitting in his familiar, down-to-earth style, calm, composed, but with something heavy in his eyes. "I've spent my life telling the stories of hard-working Americans," he began, "people who get up before the sun and go home after dark. But sometimes the truth you dig up doesn't make it to air. Not because it's boring, but because it's dangerous." He paused before adding, "I didn't expect it to follow me home." The video lasted only 3 minutes, but it sent shockwaves through his fan base. He never mentioned the investigation directly, yet his words seemed to confirm everything people had suspected, that something buried within his archives had forced powerful hands to intervene. Within hours, the video was mysteriously deleted. Those who had downloaded it noted that just before it cut off, Mike looked directly into the camera and said, "If you ever wonder what's really under our feet, remember this: some dirt doesn't wash off." After the post vanished, news outlets scrambled for answers. A whistleblower from inside the investigative team leaked that one of the recovered drives contained data linked to government-contracted labor programs that had operated in secrecy. Allegedly, Mike's footage documented locations where these workers lived in unsanitary and inhumane conditions, images that would have devastated reputations if aired. What made it even more disturbing was that the same facilities had ties to waste management companies featured in early Dirty Jobs episodes. Suddenly, those harmless stories about grease traps, sewers, and factory cleanup didn't look so innocent anymore. It seemed Mike had stumbled across evidence of corporate negligence so severe that silencing him became the only way to protect those responsible. Fans flooded his old posts with messages of support, while others begged him to go public. But Mike had vanished again, and this time even his closest colleagues didn't know where he'd gone. Behind the scenes, those who'd handled the evidence began receiving anonymous warnings to stop digging. Some files went missing from secure databases. Others were replaced with blank data logs as if erased on purpose. Yet one truth remained. Whatever Mike Rowe had found inside his home wasn't just shocking. It was something the world wasn't meant to see. Weeks later, the frenzy surrounding Mike Rowe reached its peak. Major news outlets tried to outdo each other with theories. Some claimed he'd uncovered classified environmental data. Others swore he had evidence of illegal testing programs buried beneath industrial zones. But all speculation stopped when a final video surfaced on a small anonymous video sharing channel titled "The Job I Couldn't Show You." The upload bore Mike's unmistakable voice. Though the footage was grainy and edited in fragments, it began with him walking through a vast underground corridor, holding a dim flashlight. His tone was calm but resolute. "I spent years showing America the value of hard work," he said, "but I never showed what happens when the work turns against the worker." As the camera panned across rusted pipes and leaking chemical barrels, a faint hum echoed in the background. "This was filmed years ago," Mike continued. "The footage you're seeing was never meant to air. They told me it was too much truth for television. Maybe they were right." The screen flickered, cutting to glimpses of documents, old photographs of workers, and aerial shots of remote industrial sites, each connected to companies still operating today. "We're surrounded by jobs that have stories buried in them," he said, "some of them literally." The clip abruptly cut to black, followed by a single line of text. The real dirty job was keeping quiet. Within hours, the video went viral, but then disappeared across every major platform simultaneously. The original uploader's channel was deleted, and any re-uploads were met with copyright takedowns, bearing the mark of national media security. No one ever confirmed if the footage was authentic, but those who saw it swore it looked exactly like Mike. Older, wearier, yet unmistakably him. In the following days, his Maryland home was officially listed as uninhabited, and all personal belongings were moved to an undisclosed location. Reporters camping outside the property were driven away by unmarked vehicles. Some said they heard construction sounds at night. Others claimed the house was being stripped and renovated to erase traces of what had been there. Still, the mystery didn't fade. Former Dirty Jobs crew members began sharing coded posts online, photos of dirt-covered gloves, abandoned tunnels, and captions like, "Some things never stay buried." Fans interpreted these as quiet tributes to their friend and host. A few months later, a small package arrived at a local news station in Baltimore. Inside was a handwritten note signed simply, "MR." It read, "Truth isn't lost. It's just waiting for someone brave enough to dig." Alongside it was a USB drive containing unseen Dirty Jobs clips, heartfelt, humorous, and profoundly human moments, showing Mike helping ordinary Americans in the toughest conditions imaginable. Nothing sinister, nothing secret, just the soul of the show he loved.
It's my kind of filth. I love it. Joining me now in studio to discuss the new season of Dirty Jobs.
Well, there have been many that I've said, no, I'd rather not do that, but my only job on that show is to try, right? So if I did anything smart in this whole crazy...
Just moments ago, breaking alerts flashed across television screens and social media feeds. Mike Rowe, the man who made America fall in love with hard work, has just made an announcement that no one saw coming. For 2 decades, Mike has been the voice and face of honesty, grit, and common sense, guiding audiences through the dirtiest jobs and the hardest truths. But today, the story is not about coal miners or sewer inspectors, it's about Mike himself. At 62 years old, Rowe stands at a crossroads, facing headlines that have stunned both fans and critics alike. The man who has always celebrated the backbone of America is suddenly caught in the spotlight of a deeply personal revelation. What he just admitted, barely a minute ago, has the potential to reshape how we view not only his career, but the very mission he has fought for his entire life. To understand the breaking news surrounding Mike Rowe today, you have to travel back to Baltimore, Maryland, where his story began. Long before the world knew him as the rugged host of Dirty Jobs, Mike was simply a kid with a love for storytelling and performance. He wasn't born into television. In fact, his earliest passions were worlds away from crawling through sewers or climbing into oil rigs. As a boy, he was heavily involved in theater, speech, and music, where his natural charisma and deep baritone voice first took shape. Mike often credits his grandfather, a skilled tradesman, as his greatest inspiration. His grandfather was a man who could build or fix just about anything, and young Mike admired not only his work ethic, but also his quiet dignity. While many children dreamed of superheroes or movie stars, Mike saw his grandfather as the ultimate role model. That respect for hands-on labor, planted in his childhood, would later become the driving force behind his career. But Mike's path to fame was anything but traditional. After graduating from Towson University with a degree in communication studies, he pursued voice work and performance. Few people know that before he ever set foot on the sets of Dirty Jobs, Mike was a trained opera singer. He performed with the Baltimore Opera, using his rich voice in a way that seemed destined for music halls rather than muddy trenches. Yet, despite his success in the arts, he felt drawn to something more, something that allowed him to connect with ordinary people in extraordinary ways. His career in television began with commercial work and narration. Soon, his deep voice was everywhere, advertising products, narrating documentaries, and lending authority to countless programs. That booming, trustworthy sound became his signature. But the true turning point came when Mike landed a hosting job on QVC, the home shopping network. While the role may not have seemed glamorous, it honed his quick wit and ability to improvise. Selling random gadgets to insomniac shoppers taught him the art of engaging an audience, no matter the subject. From there, Mike built a resume that included travel programs, narration gigs, and hosting opportunities. But behind the polished delivery and on-camera charm, he remained deeply connected to his Baltimore roots, his respect for laborers, and his desire to tell stories that mattered. It was this authenticity that would eventually capture the attention of Discovery Channel producers, who were searching for someone to host a show unlike anything else on television. A show about the dirtiest, most dangerous, and most overlooked jobs in America. Mike didn't just fit the mold, he broke it. Unlike many TV personalities, he didn't approach these workers as a detached observer. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves and joined them side by side in their grueling tasks. Whether it was castrating lambs, diving into sewage pipes, or cleaning shark tanks, Mike embraced the grit with humor, humility, and genuine curiosity. By the early 2000s, Dirty Jobs wasn't just a quirky documentary series, it was a cultural phenomenon. And at the heart of it all was Mike Rowe, the Baltimore kid who grew up to become the storyteller of America's labor force. It's this journey, from opera halls to oil rigs, from QVC to the muddy backroads of America, that makes today's headline so impactful. Mike has always been more than just a TV host. He's been a bridge between the world of entertainment and the world of real work. And as his story takes a shocking turn today, fans can't help but look back at where it all began. In Baltimore, with a boy who dreamed big but never forgot the value of hard work. When Dirty Jobs premiered in 2003, no one could have predicted that it would become one of the most important shows of its time. On paper, the concept sounded simple. A host would travel the country, stepping into the dirtiest, toughest, and most overlooked professions in America. But when Mike Rowe became that host, something extraordinary happened. He didn't just stand back and narrate, he dove headfirst into every task, getting covered in mud, grime, sweat, and worse. Viewers were instantly captivated, not just by the shocking jobs themselves, but by Mike's willingness to do them with humor, humility, and respect for the people who lived that life every day. From the very first episode, it was clear this was not a show about laughs at someone else's expense. Instead, it was about shining a spotlight on unsung heroes, the sewer inspectors, pig farmers, coal miners, garbage collectors, and crab fishermen who kept society running but rarely received recognition. By stepping into their world, Mike turned them into the stars of the show. He gave them dignity in a way no television program had ever done before. For 8 seasons, Mike took audiences on a journey across America that was both educational and emotional. He exposed people to the reality of dangerous, back-breaking work, while also reminding them of its value. These weren't just dirty jobs. They were necessary jobs, and without them, the country would grind to a halt. In an era where glossy celebrity culture dominated television, Dirty Jobs was a breath of fresh air. It showed authenticity, grit, and humanity in its rawest form. The workers Mike met weren't actors. They were fathers, mothers, and neighbors, and their stories resonated with millions. But what made the show unforgettable was Mike himself. His quick wit turned even the most revolting tasks into moments of levity. His narration transformed grotesque imagery into poetic storytelling. And his genuine curiosity made viewers feel like they were learning alongside him. Behind the dirt and danger, Mike always asked the bigger questions. Who does this job? Why does it matter? And what happens if nobody is willing to do it anymore? These weren't just throwaway thoughts. They were the heartbeat of the series. They tapped into a growing cultural concern: America's disappearing workforce in skilled trades. The show became a rallying cry for valuing hard work, and Mike became its face and voice. Dirty Jobs was more than entertainment. It was social commentary. It reminded people that the nation was built on sweat, calloused hands, and unglamorous labor. Ratings soared, and the show became one of Discovery Channel's most successful programs, spawning specials, spin-offs, and endless reruns. To this day, reruns of Dirty Jobs continue to inspire younger audiences who missed its original run, proving its message is timeless. Mike Rowe didn't just host a TV show, he created a cultural movement. That is why today's breaking headline feels so monumental. Because when Mike Rowe makes news, it's never just about him. It's about the millions who saw their own struggles reflected in his journey through America's dirtiest jobs. When the cameras stopped rolling on Dirty Jobs, many assumed Mike Rowe would quietly fade into television history. Remembered fondly for his time crawling through sewers and standing knee-deep in sludge. But Mike wasn't done. In many ways, Dirty Jobs had only been the beginning. What he witnessed across America, the shortage of skilled laborers, the pride of those who worked with their hands, and the widening gap between education and real-world needs, ignited a fire in him. He realized he couldn't simply walk away. He had a mission, and it was far bigger than television ratings. In 2008, Mike launched the Rowe Works Foundation, an organization devoted to promoting skilled trades and funding scholarships for those who wanted to pursue them. At a time when high schools pushed college as the only path to success, Mike stood up and said what few were willing to admit. America desperately needed welders, electricians, plumbers, mechanics, and carpenters just as much as it needed lawyers, doctors, or CEOs. He argued that dignity was not found in the letters after your name, but in the effort you put into your work. For Mike, this wasn't a talking point. It was a call to action. Through the foundation, millions of dollars have been distributed in scholarships, giving countless young people opportunities to enter careers that society often overlooked. Mike used his platform to highlight stories of those who chose the trades, showing how they built fulfilling lives without the crushing debt of a 4-year degree. He appeared before Congress, spoke at universities, and wrote op-eds that challenged the educational status quo. His message was always the same: real work matters, and without people willing to do it, society cannot survive. Beyond scholarships, Mike took his advocacy into storytelling again, this time through his popular Facebook series, Returning the Favor, where he traveled across the country shining a spotlight on ordinary people doing extraordinary things in their communities. The show, like Dirty Jobs, was filled with humor and humility, but it also carried a deep sense of gratitude for everyday heroes. It became another hit, drawing millions of views and cementing Mike's reputation not just as a TV personality, but as a moral voice for hard-working Americans. He also embraced the digital age, launching his The Way I Heard It podcast, a modern-day version of Paul Harvey's famous radio stories. Short, sharp, and packed with unexpected twists, these stories connected him to millions of listeners who valued his ability to find meaning in the overlooked corners of history and everyday life. Yet, despite his growing influence in multiple arenas, Mike never lost his grounding. He resisted being boxed into politics, refusing to align himself with one party or ideology. Instead, he championed what he called common-sense solutions, often criticizing both sides of the political spectrum when they ignored the workers who kept the country running. His willingness to speak plainly, without fear of offending, made him a refreshing voice in a world dominated by spin. All of this explains why today's news carries so much weight. Because Mike Rowe is not just a television host, he's an advocate, a teacher, a storyteller, and, in the eyes of millions, a modern-day philosopher for working America. Every headline about him echoes far beyond Hollywood or cable networks. It reverberates in classrooms, workshops, farms, and factories across the nation. As the years went by, Mike Rowe's role in American culture shifted. He was no longer just the guy from Dirty Jobs. He had become something more, an unlikely philosopher, a voice of reason in an increasingly divided nation. While politicians bickered and media outlets shouted across ideological lines, Mike carved out a space where honesty, humility, and common sense still mattered. He did this not through speeches filled with jargon, but through simple, relatable stories. His Facebook posts became legendary, shared by millions for their wit, clarity, and ability to cut through the noise. He would take everyday experiences, fixing a broken toilet, observing a bird's nest, remembering a lesson from his grandfather, and turn them into reflections on the bigger questions: work, responsibility, gratitude, and the meaning of success. Unlike the endless talking heads that filled cable news, Mike spoke like a neighbor over the fence. His style wasn't about inflaming anger or stoking division. It was about reminding people of shared values that had quietly eroded in modern life. He urged people to look past labels, to see the humanity in one another, and to never forget the dignity of work. For many, he became the antidote to the chaos of political discourse. Yet his refusal to fully align with any party or agenda also made him a target. Some accused him of being too conservative when he spoke about personal responsibility. Others accused him of being too liberal when he criticized corporations for neglecting workers. But Mike rarely wavered. He insisted that common sense had no party affiliation, and he refused to let pundits force him into a corner. His podcast, The Way I Heard It, further cemented this reputation. In every episode, he unpacked short but powerful stories filled with twists and lessons that always left listeners reflecting long after the credits rolled. It wasn't politics, it was humanity, told in a way that cut across ideology and background. The same deep voice that once narrated crab fishermen braving icy waters was now guiding audiences through the storms of modern society. Mike's ability to bridge divides became even more crucial during times of national crisis. When unemployment soared, when industries collapsed, when the pandemic reshaped how America worked, Mike was there, reminding everyone that the workers on the front lines, the truckers, the nurses, the electricians, the farmers, were the true backbone of the country. His posts and interviews during those years carried weight because they were grounded in authenticity, not ambition. People trusted him not because he was famous, but because he had earned that trust crawling through sewers, hauling garbage, and slaughtering pigs alongside real workers. That credibility made him unique, and it is why every word he speaks today reverberates far beyond the television industry. He became a figure not of glamour or celebrity, but of trust. And in a time when trust in institutions, media, and leadership has eroded to dangerous levels, Mike Rowe emerged as a rare voice people still believed in, which is exactly why the announcement he made just minutes ago has hit so hard. Because when Mike Rowe speaks, America listens, not out of obligation, but because they know he has always told the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. For all his success and influence, Mike Rowe's life has not been without challenges. In fact, behind the calm voice of reason that fans admire, there have been whispers of struggles, setbacks, and surprising twists that shaped the man we see today. Fame may have given him a platform, but it also placed him under constant scrutiny. Every word, every opinion, and every personal choice has been dissected by critics eager to find cracks in his reputation. Mike has always carried himself with humility, but even he has admitted that the weight of expectations can be exhausting. There were rumors over the years about his health, questions about whether the demanding work of dirty jobs and his countless other projects had taken a toll on him physically. Crawling through toxic sewers, handling dangerous machinery, and exposing himself to hazardous conditions for the sake of television entertainment wasn't without consequences. He has spoken openly about lingering aches, back pain, and the exhaustion that followed after long days of filming. Yet he rarely complained, choosing instead to highlight the far greater physical burdens carried by the workers he shadowed. Beyond the physical toll, Mike also faced the invisible strain of public life. His blunt honesty, which so many admired, occasionally sparked controversy. A single post on Facebook could ignite firestorms, with people on both sides twisting his words to fit their own agendas. For a man who prided himself on standing outside of politics, it was frustrating to see his message dragged into partisan battles. And then there were the financial challenges. While many assumed that a successful television career meant endless wealth, Mike often reminded people that his fortune was not nearly as vast as tabloids claimed. He poured much of his earnings into his foundation and advocacy work, sometimes at personal cost. Unlike celebrities who built empires off endorsements, Mike often turned down opportunities that felt inauthentic to his mission. His reputation mattered more than money, but that integrity sometimes came with sacrifice. There were also personal struggles he rarely spoke about. His decision to live a more private life, avoiding marriage and children, raised questions in interviews and gossip columns. Mike, always quick with humor, often deflected, saying he was too busy or that his work had become his family. But close friends revealed that the solitude, while chosen, sometimes weighed on him. It wasn't loneliness, exactly, but a sense of isolation that came from carrying so much responsibility on his own shoulders. Yet for every rumor of hardship, Mike seemed to find ways to surprise people. Just when fans thought he might step back from the spotlight, he returned with a new project, a fresh perspective, or an unexpected story. Whether launching Returning the Favor, expanding his foundation, or taking his podcast to new heights, Mike constantly reinvented himself. He became proof that resilience was not just something he admired in others, but something he lived himself. And this is why the news breaking today feels so heavy. Because while the world has long speculated about the struggles Mike Rowe carried in private, he has now admitted something publicly that few expected. A truth that explains years of rumors, clarifies whispers about his future, and sets the stage for what could be the most dramatic chapter of his career. And then it happened. Just minutes ago, Mike Rowe stepped forward with an announcement that stunned fans, rattled colleagues, and sent shockwaves across the industry. In a carefully worded but emotional statement, he revealed that he would be stepping away from much of his public work to confront challenges that could no longer remain hidden. For years, speculation had circled about his health, his future, and the toll his relentless schedule had taken. Today, Mike confirmed what many feared but few dared to say. The grind of decades spent in hazardous environments and under constant stress has caught up with him. Though he did not go into every detail, Mike admitted that doctors had strongly advised him to slow down, to prioritize his well-being over his relentless mission. For a man who spent his life climbing through coal dust and sewage with a smile, it was a gut punch to hear him admit vulnerability. But it was not just about health. Mike also acknowledged the emotional toll of carrying the weight of advocacy alone for so long. He spoke about the pressure of being expected to always provide wisdom, to always be the voice of reason in an increasingly unreasonable world. He admitted that he had often felt like he was shouting into the void, trying to remind the country of its backbone while watching institutions continue to ignore the skilled workers he fought so hard to honor. And in a moment that silenced millions of fans, he revealed that the future of his beloved foundation, Mike Rowe Works, would be changing. While it would not disappear, he explained that leadership would be passed on to others, allowing him to step back and focus on his personal life. For an organization that had funded countless scholarships and reshaped the conversation about work in America, this transition marked the end of an era. The announcement wasn't framed as a farewell, but rather as an inevitable shift. Mike promised that his voice would still be heard, perhaps through his podcast, through occasional projects, or in smaller doses. But he was honest. He could not continue at the same pace, in the same way, without sacrificing his health and his future. It was bittersweet, both an admission of limitation and a declaration of self-preservation. Fans were left stunned. Many had seen Mike as indestructible, a man immune to the pressures of fame and the dangers of labor. To hear him confess that he too was human, fragile, and in need of rest was shocking in its honesty. And yet, in true Mike Rowe fashion, he ended with humor. He reminded people that he had always said dirty jobs was a love letter to work, not to him. The jobs would go on, the workers would endure, and America's backbone would not collapse simply because one man stepped back. But even with that humor, the reality was clear. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter for Mike Rowe, one where he finally put himself first. The reaction to Mike Rowe's announcement was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes of his statement, social media platforms lit up with an outpouring of emotion. Fans who had followed him since the earliest days of Dirty Jobs expressed heartbreak, gratitude, and disbelief. For many, Mike had been more than a television host. He had been a mentor from afar, a voice that gave dignity to their own struggles. Truck drivers wrote about listening to his podcast on long hauls and how his words kept them company through lonely nights. Electricians, welders, farmers, and mechanics shared memories of watching Dirty Jobs with their children and explaining, with pride, "That's what Dad does." For them, Mike wasn't just on TV, he was proof that their work mattered. Former Dirty Jobs crew members and workers who once appeared on the show also chimed in, posting old photos, recounting behind-the-scenes stories, and thanking Mike for putting their work on the map. One crab fisherman from Alaska wrote, "Without Mike, nobody would have ever understood what we go through out here. He made America care, and I'll never forget it." The industry itself was equally shaken. Television executives who once doubted that a show about sewage pipes and garbage men could succeed admitted that Mike had forever changed the rules of storytelling. His unique blend of humor, humility, and authenticity had become a gold standard, something almost impossible to replicate. Producers spoke about how Mike's exit marked the end of an era in reality television, one where real work, not staged drama, captivated audiences. Scholars and labor advocates also weighed in, noting the cultural void his absence would leave. Mike Rowe wasn't just a TV host, one columnist wrote. He was America's blue-collar philosopher. His voice carried more weight than most politicians, and people trusted him in ways they no longer trust leaders. But not all reactions were sentimental. Some critics suggested his departure highlighted a deeper problem: the nation's ongoing neglect of skilled trades. If Mike Rowe can't keep this fight going, one commentator wrote, then maybe the rest of us need to wake up and take his place. The skills gap isn't going away, and losing his voice makes it worse. The financial world even took notice. Companies that had partnered with Mike through advocacy campaigns scrambled to figure out what his reduced presence might mean for their own outreach. Foundations that had relied on his star power to raise awareness for scholarships and workforce training faced new uncertainty. Meanwhile, everyday Americans continued to flood his platforms with support. Messages of encouragement poured in. "Take care of yourself, Mike. You've taken care of us long enough. We'll carry the torch. You've already lit the way." Even celebrities joined in, with actors, musicians, and fellow hosts praising him as one of the most authentic figures to ever appear on television. For a man who had spent his career lifting up others, seeing millions now rush to lift him up was both poetic and fitting. And yet, beneath the gratitude and praise, one question loomed. What comes next? As the dust settles from today's shocking announcement, one truth remains undeniable. Mike Rowe has already secured his place in American history. His legacy is not confined to a television series or a foundation. It lives in the millions of lives he touched, the countless workers he dignified, and the conversations he sparked about the value of real labor. Long after the cameras stopped rolling, Mike's voice will still echo in classrooms where teachers show clips of dirty jobs to remind students that every career has worth. It will echo in workshops where apprentices pick up tools, inspired by scholarships that carry his name. It will echo in homes where families remember gathering around the TV to watch him crawl through filth with a smile, proving that laughter and respect can coexist even in the dirtiest corners of society. His departure from the forefront does not signal an end, but a passing of the torch. For years, Mike carried the burden of being the sole mainstream advocate for America's skilled trades. Now, his absence challenges others, educators, lawmakers, parents, and workers themselves, to step up and continue the fight he started. In many ways, this might be his greatest contribution, forcing the nation to realize that one man cannot shoulder this mission alone. Yet, even as he steps back, Mike has promised he will not disappear. His podcast will likely continue, his occasional reflections will still surface, and his humor will no doubt find its way into the public square.
We have sent such a clear, unintended, invisible hand type message to a whole generation of kids, not just kids who might have entered.
When Dirty Jobs premiered in 2003, it wasn't just television. It was a revolution in how America saw work. Hosted by the ever-charismatic Mike Rowe, the series took viewers far from boardrooms and red carpets into the heart of the nation's most grueling, unsung professions. From sewer inspectors to roadkill collectors, these were the men and women who kept the country running quietly in the background. Rowe's voice, equal parts humor and humility, made audiences laugh even as they winced at what they saw. But beneath the surface of entertainment, something deeper was happening. The show's raw realism came at a cost, filming in toxic environments, witnessing accidents, and confronting the sheer emotional weight of labor no one else wanted to see. For Rowe and his team, Dirty Jobs became more than just a show. It was a journey into the unseen corners of the working world. Yet, few could have predicted that behind its success, tragedy was slowly brewing among the people who brought it to life. What most people didn't realize as they laughed along with Mike Rowe's witty commentary was just how perilous every shoot really was. The cast and crew weren't actors in a studio. They were entering unpredictable, sometimes deadly environments. Every episode meant stepping into danger zones, collapsing tunnels, unstable machinery, toxic waste sites, and confined spaces where one wrong move could mean catastrophe. Producers often had to halt filming mid-scene when gas monitors started beeping or when safety teams shouted warnings. Mike Rowe, always calm in front of the camera, came close to disaster more times than anyone knew. In one episode, while working at a wastewater treatment plant, Rowe slipped into a pool of sludge so thick it nearly pulled him under. On another occasion, a piece of malfunctioning equipment exploded mere feet from the crew, sending debris flying toward the camera. Rowe later admitted that some shoots left him questioning why he kept putting himself and his team through it, but he always went back, insisting that if the workers could handle it every day, so could he. For the crew, though, the fear was real. Camera operators developed respiratory problems from exposure to chemicals. Sound technicians fainted from heat exhaustion inside industrial furnaces. And one lighting assistant was hospitalized after falling from a catwalk while trying to get a perfect shot. The laughter and jokes that filled the episodes masked the reality that Dirty Jobs was one of the most dangerous productions on television. Each shoot felt like a gamble between storytelling and survival. And as the seasons went on, that danger began to take its toll, not only on the team's bodies, but on their minds. Every episode of Dirty Jobs introduced viewers to people who lived in the shadows of society's comfort. Men and women who cleaned, repaired, and built the world most took for granted. While Mike Rowe received applause for shining a light on them, their own lives rarely changed after the cameras stopped rolling. Many of these workers had already been fighting uphill battles long before Rowe arrived with a film crew. They faced chronic injuries, mounting medical bills, and the endless uncertainty of seasonal or contract work. After their brief moment on television, some even lost their jobs, either because their workplaces shut down or because the attention drew unwanted scrutiny from regulators or management. A few were celebrated in their small towns as local heroes, but that attention faded quickly, leaving them back where they started, tired, overworked, and underpaid. Rowe often spoke about how emotionally difficult it was to revisit some of these people years later. He found that fame didn't change the harsh truth. Hard work rarely guarantees stability. One crab fisherman featured on the show died in a boating accident just months after filming. A coal miner developed severe lung disease, and despite fan donations, he struggled to afford treatment. The show had opened a national conversation about respecting skilled labor, but many of those who made it possible continued to suffer in silence. Some of them confided to Rowe that appearing on television brought mixed feelings. They were proud to represent their trades, but it also exposed them to ridicule from those who couldn't understand why anyone would choose such dangerous work. For others, it was bittersweet. Seeing their episode air reminded them of colleagues who didn't live long enough to tell their own stories. Behind every handshake, every muddy laugh, and every segment of television history was a person carrying the burden of survival. Their tragedies didn't end when the camera cut. For many, that was when the real struggle began. To millions of fans, Mike Rowe appeared fearless, witty, and endlessly composed. But behind the camera, the man who made America laugh through the filth was quietly falling apart. Years of non-stop travel, brutal filming schedules, and emotional exhaustion had begun to take their toll. Rowe spent nearly a decade on the road, sleeping in motels, eating truck stop meals, and constantly pushing his body to its limits. Each week brought new dangers: sludge pits, animal carcasses, extreme heat, and unbearable stench. But what wore him down most wasn't the physical grime. It was the emotional weight of what he witnessed. He met fathers struggling to feed their families, mothers working overnight shifts to keep their homes, and proud craftsmen whose trades were disappearing before their eyes. Rowe carried those stories with him long after the cameras stopped rolling. He once admitted that while the show celebrated hard work, it also forced him to confront the fragility of the American dream. The more people he met, the more he realized how many were barely hanging on. Between filming and press tours, he started experiencing chronic fatigue and bouts of depression. He felt torn between admiration for the workers he showcased and guilt that his success came from their suffering. Fans saw him as a hero of the working class, but he privately wrestled with the question: was Dirty Jobs honoring these people or exploiting them? As the seasons went on, the laughter became harder to fake. Even Rowe's friends noticed he wasn't the same. He began avoiding public appearances, taking long breaks from filming, and questioning whether he could keep doing the show. In interviews, he later described that period as a slow collapse of purpose. The man who had once seemed indestructible was quietly burning out, trapped between his devotion to telling the truth and the personal cost of living it every single day. While Mike Rowe became the public face of Dirty Jobs, the men and women behind the camera were the true unsung heroes, and they bore scars few ever saw. The production team didn't just observe danger, they lived it. Camera operators filmed while standing in knee-deep sludge. Sound technicians worked inches from roaring machinery, and producers often had to crawl into tight, suffocating spaces just to capture the perfect shot. Each episode demanded courage, improvisation, and endurance that no script could prepare them for. But the danger wasn't always immediate. It crept in slowly, in the form of chemical exposure, exhaustion, and mental strain. Some developed chronic respiratory issues from breathing in industrial dust or sewage fumes. Others suffered burns, muscle injuries, and joint problems from carrying heavy gear in extreme conditions. The show's unpredictable nature meant the crew never knew what the next location would throw at them. One week, they might be filming in a pig farm under 110-degree heat, the next inside a freezing cold slaughterhouse or underwater construction site. It wasn't uncommon for crew members to faint, vomit, or collapse from fatigue, only to be revived and urged to continue filming. Yet, despite the hardship, most refused to quit. They believed in the show's mission to highlight real workers. Still, the emotional cost grew heavier. Witnessing the struggles of people who risked everything for survival left lasting marks. A few crew members privately admitted to having nightmares or panic attacks long after filming wrapped. Some couldn't watch the show at all after leaving. It reminded them of the pain, the fear, and the constant sense of danger they endured for years. Rowe himself often praised the team for their bravery, saying they faced the same filth, the same fear, but without the fame. But fame wouldn't have helped. Their bodies and minds had already paid the price. For many, Dirty Jobs was the proudest work they'd ever done, yet also the most punishing chapter of their lives. One that still echoes in their memories long after the final episode was filmed. As the years passed, the Dirty Jobs family endured heartbreak that viewers never knew about. Behind the smiles and banter, real tragedy was unfolding among the people who brought the show to life. Several crew members and featured workers passed away, some in accidents, others from illnesses that could be traced back to the environments they worked in. The reality that Dirty Jobs sought to portray, dangerous, gritty, and unforgiving, proved all too real. Mike Rowe often found himself delivering eulogies or sending quiet condolences to the families of those who had once stood beside him in front of the camera. He would post somber tributes on social media, remembering their laughter, their courage, and their dedication. One of the show's cameramen, who had filmed hundreds of episodes, died after complications from respiratory issues believed to have worsened from years of exposure on hazardous sites. Another crew member suffered a fatal accident while working on a non-televised industrial project shortly after leaving the series. For Rowe, these losses hit like a hammer. He said the hardest part wasn't the danger itself, but knowing the danger had caught up to people he loved. The workers featured on the show didn't fare much better. A handful of them later faced workplace disasters, chemical exposure, or fatal equipment failures. In one particularly haunting case, a man who had proudly demonstrated his trade for the show died only months later doing that same job. When Rowe heard the news, he said it stopped him cold. Those moments haunted him, serving as painful reminders that the line between storytelling and tragedy was paper thin. Every time the show returned for a new season, there were names missing from the contact list, faces gone forever, memories frozen in old footage. For viewers, Dirty Jobs was an inspiring tribute to hard work. For those who lived it, it became a bittersweet reminder of sacrifice. The laughter, the grit, the camaraderie, they were real, but so was the loss. And for the crew, every death felt like losing a piece of the show's soul, a heavy price for capturing America's most honest work on camera. When Dirty Jobs was abruptly canceled in 2012, the announcement hit both fans and the production crew like a punch to the gut. After 8 successful seasons, countless awards, and a passionate fan base, no one expected the network to pull the plug on one of the most authentic shows ever made. But behind closed doors, the truth was far more complicated than ratings or programming shifts. The show had become physically and emotionally exhausting to produce. Each episode required enormous safety planning, insurance clearances, and specialized equipment just to keep the crew alive in hazardous environments. Discovery Channel executives began to question whether the risk and the cost was still worth it. While the official explanation focused on creative direction, insiders later revealed that burnout and safety concerns played a much larger role. Mike Rowe himself admitted he wasn't surprised when the call came. He was worn down, both physically and spiritually. The long hours, the endless travel, and the cumulative trauma of witnessing so much danger had taken their toll. He felt the show had said what it needed to say, but the way it ended still hurt. There was no grand finale, no proper goodbye, just silence. Crew members were left without closure, scattered across new jobs while trying to process what had happened. Many described the final months as emotionally heavy, with tension thick on set, as everyone sensed the end was near. Rowe tried to remain positive, telling his team they had done something truly meaningful, something that would outlive them all. But he later confessed that watching the show disappear overnight felt like losing a family. For the fans, it was just a TV cancellation. For the people behind the camera, it was the end of an era, a loss of purpose, identity, and connection. The sudden cancellation left deep emotional scars that lingered for years. Even when reruns aired, Rowe couldn't bring himself to watch. He said it felt like revisiting ghosts. What was once a labor of love had turned into a bittersweet memory, buried under the weight of exhaustion and grief. The show that gave dignity to America's dirtiest work had quietly succumbed to the same relentless grind it sought to honor. When the lights went out on Dirty Jobs, Mike Rowe didn't disappear, but he did withdraw. For a while, he vanished from television, retreating from the chaos that had consumed nearly a decade of his life. The silence was intentional. After years of filming in the filthiest corners of America, he needed to breathe, to recover, and to rediscover what it meant to live without a camera following his every move. But as he rested, Rowe couldn't shake the haunting images of the people he had met: the welders, the miners, the fishermen, the forgotten men and women who had become the heart of his mission. He realized that Dirty Jobs wasn't just a show, it was a movement. So instead of walking away, he decided to honor that legacy in a new way. In 2008, before the show even ended, Rowe had quietly started the Micro Works Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to promoting skilled trades and funding vocational scholarships. After the show's cancellation, it became his life's focus. Through the foundation, he raised millions to help Americans pursue careers in plumbing, welding, construction, and electrical work, fields the modern world too often ignored. His message was clear: not everyone needs a college degree to succeed. The country runs on those willing to get their hands dirty. Yet despite this new chapter, the ghosts of Dirty Jobs still followed him. Whenever he spoke at events or appeared in interviews, people asked about the crew, the workers, the accidents, the tragedies that had never aired. Some of those stories were too painful to revisit. Others he shared with reverence, as reminders of the cost of real work. Many crew members moved on to other projects, though some left the industry altogether, their bodies and minds still bearing the strain of years in the field. A few found new purpose in teaching or safety consulting, inspired by the hardships they'd survived. For Rowe, life after Dirty Jobs became a delicate balance between honoring the past and healing from it. He often said that while the show ended, the mission never did. It evolved into something bigger, a crusade for respect, for gratitude, for a workforce that America had long taken for granted. But behind his smile and advocacy, those closest to him knew he still carried the weight of what the show revealed: that the dirtiest jobs often come with the deepest sacrifices, and no amount of fame could ever wash away what it took to tell that truth. More than a decade after its final episode, Dirty Jobs remains etched in American memory, not just as a TV show, but as a cultural reckoning. It peeled back the curtain on a reality most people never think about, exposing the grit, pain, and heart that built the modern world. But behind the laughter and witty narration lay an unspoken truth. The price of telling that story was immense. Mike Rowe and his team gave everything: time, health, comfort, and in some cases, their peace of mind. What began as a television experiment turned into a spiritual burden. The series changed how people saw work, but it also changed the people who made it. Rowe often reflects on the paradox of Dirty Jobs. It celebrated the dignity of labor, yet it revealed how unforgiving that labor could be. The workers it featured were proud, resilient, and self-reliant, but they were also invisible until Rowe showed up with a camera. When he left, many of them returned to the same dangerous environments, unseen once again. That realization haunted him. It wasn't just about dirty work anymore. It was about how society had built itself on the shoulders of those who toil in silence. Every time Rowe watches an old clip, he says he remembers the faces of the people who didn't make it, the crew members who sacrificed their health, the laughter that masked exhaustion, and the smell of sweat that lingered long after filming wrapped. Dirty Jobs didn't just change television. It reshaped the national conversation about work, pride, and respect. It reminded people that the dirtiest hands often hold the country together. But that legacy came with heartbreak. Some of the tradespeople who appeared on the show have since passed away. Others live with chronic pain or disabilities from the very work that defined them. The crew themselves became symbols of endurance, proof that storytelling can demand as much grit as the subjects it honors. For Mike Rowe, the years since have been a balancing act between remembrance and renewal. Through his foundation, he continues to champion the same cause, funding education and trade programs in memory of those who risked everything to keep the lights on, the pipes flowing, and the engines running. He calls them the real American idols, a title earned not through fame, but through sacrifice. Still, when asked if he'd ever bring Dirty Jobs back, his answer is bittersweet. He's proud of what it accomplished, but deeply aware of what it cost. The show took a toll that can't be measured in ratings or awards. It left invisible bruises on those who lived it. And yet, despite all the pain, the message endures. Dirty Jobs wasn't just about hardship. It was about honor. It was about the people who wake up before dawn, who work in the dark so others can live in comfort, who rarely get thanked but never stop showing up. Their stories, though wrapped in tragedy, carry a lesson that outlasts the show itself. That dignity doesn't come from wealth or status. It comes from effort, perseverance.
On my show, we look for people who are taking a non-traditional approach to dealing with that issue, and we've profiled dozens of them.
Just moments ago, jaw-dropping details about what really happened behind the cameras of Dirty Jobs have finally come to light. After years of silence, members of Mike Rowe's loyal crew are stepping forward with stories that completely change how fans see the beloved TV host. What was once thought to be a light-hearted look at America's toughest jobs now appears to have carried shocking dangers, emotional sacrifices, and secrets the audience never imagined. From terrifying near-death experiences to raw human moments that were edited out, this new revelation exposes the side of Dirty Jobs that no one was ever meant to see. According to the crew, what Mike endured and the choices he made when the cameras stopped rolling will leave viewers speechless. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why his crew says he didn't just host the show, he survived it. Stick around to uncover the untold truth about Mike Rowe's most dangerous days. When Dirty Jobs first premiered in 2003, nobody expected it to become a cultural movement. The idea was simple: showcase the dirtiest, most grueling, and often overlooked jobs in America, the ones no one else wanted to talk about. But as Mike Rowe and his small crew soon realized, what they had signed up for wasn't a typical TV show. It was a journey into the heart of real American labor, filled with unpredictable dangers and unforgettable people. Crew members later revealed that the show was never as scripted as audiences assumed. There were no rehearsals, no second takes, and no fancy setups. Once the camera started rolling, anything could happen. And it usually did. From the very beginning, Mike insisted on total authenticity. He refused to use stunt doubles or cut corners. If a worker was knee-deep in a pig pen, Mike would be right there with them. If a sewer worker had to crawl through waist-high sludge, Mike would go first. One camera operator described how, On their third week of filming, the team arrived at a wastewater treatment plant where the stench was so overwhelming that half the crew gagged within minutes. But Mike? He smiled, grabbed a shovel, and said, "If they can handle this every day, so can we." That moment, the crew said, defined what Dirty Jobs was really about: respect, endurance, and authenticity, no matter how uncomfortable things got. There were no safety scripts either. Each new location brought new risks: toxic fumes, unstable ground, venomous animals, and heavy machinery that could crush a man in seconds. According to one producer, Mike's biggest fear wasn't danger, it was faking it. He believed that the audience could smell dishonesty, and he was determined to make sure Dirty Jobs stayed as real as possible. That stubborn dedication often left the crew shaking their heads, torn between admiration and fear. The show's early success shocked everyone. Viewers couldn't get enough of the genuine grit and humor Mike brought to every episode. But behind that charm was a man constantly pushing the limits of safety, of endurance, and sometimes of sanity. Crew members recall nights when Mike would collapse on the floor of their makeshift motel rooms, exhausted, his clothes still caked with mud. Yet even then, he'd be writing notes for the next day's shoot, determined to make sure the workers' stories were told the right way. The show quickly evolved from entertainment into something deeper, a raw documentary of working-class America, seen through the eyes of a man who refused to pretend. Every episode became a test of willpower, not just for Mike, but for everyone on his team. "He never asked us to do something he wouldn't do himself," one crew member said. "That's why we followed him into the worst places imaginable." But as Dirty Jobs grew in popularity, the stakes kept rising. What started as a celebration of hard work was slowly turning into a series of life-threatening adventures. The audience saw laughter, mud, and camaraderie. But what they didn't see were the moments of panic, fear, and near disaster that came once the cameras stopped. And soon, those unseen moments would begin to take a toll on everyone involved, leading to close calls that would forever change how the crew saw Mike Rowe. What fans never saw on television were the struggles that unfolded when the cameras weren't rolling. The laughter, jokes, and quick edits made it all look easy, but behind every episode of Dirty Jobs was a crew pushed to their breaking point. Long hours, grueling weather, and unpredictable work environments tested everyone's endurance. From scorching heat in open fields to freezing nights deep underground, the team endured it all to capture reality in its rawest form. Crew members often slept in vans, skipped meals, and worked with barely any rest, while Mike stayed right beside them every step of the way. One producer revealed that during the show's early seasons, several shoots almost had to be canceled because of unsafe conditions. Collapsing tunnels, malfunctioning equipment, and dangerous animals were regular occurrences. Yet Mike was always the first to reassure everyone that they could make it through. He had this strange calm, one cameraman recalled. Even when everything was going wrong, Mike would crack a joke and somehow make you believe it'd all work out. That attitude kept morale alive when exhaustion and fear set in. But it came at a cost. Mike was known for pushing through pain, whether it was chemical burns, infections, or pulled muscles. He rarely complained. On one occasion, while filming an episode about snake removal, Mike was bitten through his glove. The injury didn't make it into the final cut, but crew members remember how his hand swelled almost immediately. He refused medical treatment until the day's shoot was done, telling his team, "If the locals can handle it, I can too." the camera, operators were often in just as much danger. Many recall being inches away from spinning machinery, hanging off cliffs, or knee-deep in toxic sludge, all while keeping the lens focused on Mike. There were moments I thought, "This is it. This is the one that ends us," one cameraman admitted, but Mike made us believe every crazy moment was worth it. The show's rawness made it a hit, but few people realized how much suffering went into creating that authenticity. Between shoots, Mike often checked on his crew personally, ensuring everyone was mentally okay before the next challenge. "He never acted like a TV host," said one sound engineer. "He was one of us, tired, dirty, and determined to keep going." But behind Mike's reassuring smile was a man carrying more stress than anyone knew. The relentless pace, the danger, and the responsibility to represent American workers truthfully were starting to wear on him. Crew members began to notice him getting quieter, staying up late alone after wrap, writing in his journal, or recording thoughts for future narration. What he never told them was how deeply the experiences affected him, the people he met, the risks he took, and the emotional weight of the stories he was telling. It was becoming clear that Dirty Jobs wasn't just a show. It was a mission, one that demanded everything from those brave enough to film it. As the years went on, the physical and emotional toll of Dirty Jobs began to reveal itself in ways no one could ignore. What fans saw on screen, the laughter, the wisecracks, the fearless attitude, hid the truth of just how close Mike and his crew came to disaster more times than anyone ever knew. They weren't filming in controlled environments or Hollywood sets. They were walking into real danger, day after day, for the sake of authenticity. One of the most terrifying moments came during the filming of a wastewater treatment episode. As Mike worked inside a massive underground tank, a machinery malfunction triggered a sudden surge of water. Within seconds, the tank began to flood. The crew dropped their cameras and rushed to pull Mike out, fearing the worst. For over a minute, communication was lost. When they finally found him, soaked and gasping, Mike brushed it off with a laugh and said, "Guess we just found the dirtiest job of all." But the crew later admitted it was the closest they'd ever come to tragedy. Incidents like that weren't rare. During a mining segment, toxic gas alarms suddenly went off mid-shoot, forcing the entire team to evacuate. On another occasion, Mike slipped while standing on a slick beam in a steel mill, catching himself just in time before a deadly fall. These moments were never shown on TV, edited out to keep the show lighthearted. But for the crew, they were haunting reminders that danger was always one mistake away. Yet, despite the near-death experiences, Mike's resilience never wavered. He saw each episode as a responsibility to represent the people doing these jobs every single day, without recognition. His determination inspired the crew to keep going, even when they were terrified. One sound technician said, "Every time we thought it was too much, Mike would look at us and say, 'If these folks can wake up and do it again tomorrow, so can we.'" That kind of leadership kept everyone grounded, but it also came at a personal cost. The weight of seeing the hardship of real workers, combined with constant travel and danger, began to wear Mike down. Behind the laughter was a man who was often exhausted, sometimes emotionally shaken, and quietly questioning how much longer he could keep going. There were nights when he'd sit alone after filming, replaying the day's events in silence. One crew member recalled finding him once by a campfire, staring into the flames and muttering, "You can only fake being fearless for so long." The next morning, he was back to joking and smiling as if nothing had happened. That was Mike's way, burying the fear, focusing on the mission, and leading by example. What no one outside that crew ever knew was that the bond they shared became unbreakable because of those close calls. Every danger faced together forged loyalty and trust that would last a lifetime. But as the seasons went on, those moments of survival began to weigh heavier, hinting that something deep inside Mike Rowe was starting to change. As Dirty Jobs exploded into one of Discovery Channel's biggest hits, new pressures began to surface, not just from the danger, but from behind the scenes. The higher the ratings climbed, the more the network demanded. Bigger challenges, riskier stunts, more drama. But for Mike Rowe and his crew, it was never supposed to be about showmanship. It was about truth. That clash of values began to create friction, and soon, tensions started building where there had once been only brotherhood. The crew was fiercely loyal to Mike, but they were also exhausted. Endless travel, physical strain, and constant exposure to danger left tempers short. Producers pushed for episodes that looked more intense or more dangerous, while the crew worried that they were crossing the line between bravery and recklessness. One longtime cameraman admitted, "There were days we'd beg Mike not to do something. He'd just grin and say, 'If I don't do it, it's not real.' That's who he was." Mike's commitment to authenticity was unwavering, but it also put him at odds with safety protocols. During one shoot inside an unstable grain silo, the crew insisted on pulling him out when they noticed shifting debris. Mike refused until they got the full shot. Later, the footage aired, but the tension between them never quite faded. "We were angry because we cared," said the same cameraman. "He'd risk his life for one scene, and we couldn't stop him." Yet even in those heated moments, Mike always found a way to bring everyone back together. After long, dangerous days, he'd invite the crew to dinner, usually at a roadside diner or a motel parking lot barbecue. There, they'd talk, laugh, and decompress. No matter what happened, one sound tech recalled, Mike made sure we ended the day as a team. He said, "If we can't trust each other, we don't belong out there." That sense of unity became the show's backbone. They were more than co-workers. They were family bound by sweat, fear, and respect. Still, the emotional strain was undeniable. The longer they worked, the more they saw how the fame of Dirty Jobs was changing everything. Producers started sending more staff, publicists appeared on site, and suddenly, the small, tight-knit group that once traveled together felt invaded by outsiders. The crew admitted they missed the early days when it was just them, the cameras, and Mike's dry humor holding it all together. Through every argument, though, Mike's loyalty never wavered. He defended his team against studio pressure, often threatening to walk off set if anyone disrespected the people behind the lens. He'd tell executives, "No crew, no show," one producer revealed, and he meant it. That kind of leadership earned Mike lifelong loyalty, even in disagreement. The fights were real, but so was the love. It was a bond built not in luxury, but in dirt, danger, and shared purpose. One that would be tested again and again as Dirty Jobs reached its peak. For every episode of Dirty Jobs that aired, there were hours of footage no one ever saw. And according to the crew, some of the most powerful moments were the ones that ended up on the cutting room floor. While audiences saw Mike Rowe laughing, joking, and tackling impossible tasks, what was hidden were the emotional, vulnerable moments that revealed who he truly was. Producers often trimmed scenes that didn't fit the entertaining tone, but the crew says those were the moments that made the show real. One editor confessed that some of the most heartfelt exchanges like when Mike comforted a grieving worker who'd lost a co-worker in an accident, or when he quietly thanked an elderly farmer for 60 years of labor, were never shown. They weren't flashy enough, the editor said, but they were the essence of Mike. Behind the lighthearted tone, the truth was that Dirty Jobs was deeply emotional. The show often brought Mike face to face with stories of loss, sacrifice, and generational hardship. After filming, he'd sometimes sit with workers for hours, long after the cameras stopped rolling, just listening to their stories. Many of those conversations were too personal for TV, and Mike fought to protect them from being turned into entertainment. According to one producer, Mike argued with the network multiple times about how the show should portray laborers. He wanted the tone to honor their dignity, not exploit their struggles. "Mike didn't want pity," said the producer. "He wanted respect." Sometimes, those battles meant certain scenes never made it to air, no matter how meaningful they were. One cameraman recalled a moment when Mike broke down after filming in a factory where several workers had recently been injured. The exhaustion and emotion finally caught up to him, and for the first time, the crew saw him cry. He told us, "These people don't need sympathy. They need recognition." We turned off the camera and just let him be human. But the audience never saw that side of him. It wasn't part of the brand. Even years later, crew members regret that so many of those raw, human scenes were hidden from the public. Those were the moments that showed what the show really meant. Not the mud or the stunts, but the people, one said. Still, Mike's influence extended far beyond what was edited out. Off-camera, he often returned to help the workers he met, paying for tools, donating to small businesses, or connecting them with opportunities through his foundation. He never asked for credit, and the network rarely mentioned it. To him, it wasn't about publicity. It was about purpose. And while the world loved the humor and chaos of Dirty Jobs, his crew knew that the truest version of the show was buried in the footage no one ever saw. The version where Mike Rowe's compassion spoke louder than his fame. Away from the lights and microphones, Mike Rowe was a completely different kind of television host, one who didn't crave fame or attention. According to his crew, the Mike they knew off-camera was quieter, more reflective, and deeply philosophical about the meaning of work. When filming stopped, he wasn't rushing to interviews or red carpets. He was sitting beside mechanics, farmers, and factory workers, asking questions most celebrities wouldn't think to ask. He wanted to understand people, one sound operator said. Not just what they did, but why they did it. After long days of shooting, when others were resting, Mike could often be found at local diners with his crew, talking about what they had witnessed that day. He spoke about the pride in a welder's hands, the silence of a farmer's struggle, and the unseen dignity of janitors and sewer workers. He saw poetry in labor, and it changed how the crew viewed their own jobs. He made us see value in the things the world ignores, a cameraman recalled. That attitude bled into everything he did. When the cameras weren't rolling, Mike stayed in touch with many of the people they filmed with, sending handwritten letters, checking in on families, and even attending funerals when tragedy struck. He never did it for publicity, said a producer. He did it because he cared. His humility became a quiet inspiration for everyone around him. The crew often joked that Mike was the philosopher of dirt. During their travels, he'd read passages from old books, quoting thinkers about work, purpose, and the soul of America. It wasn't uncommon for him to pause during a road trip and give a spontaneous speech about how every job mattered, that the nation depended on people whose names no one would ever know. But that same passion sometimes left him burdened. Crew members said that the more he saw, the more it weighed on him. The struggles of hardworking Americans, the decline of trade professions, and the growing cultural disconnect between labor and respect. He felt like he had to be their voice, one producer said. He carried that responsibility everywhere we went. Even as Dirty Jobs grew into a global brand, Mike avoided the celebrity lifestyle. He didn't own an entourage or demand luxury. He stayed in the same budget motels as the crew and shared meals with them at gas stations and truck stops. When producers offered him a private trailer, he declined, saying, "If the crew's sweating in the heat, I'm not sitting in air conditioning." It was that integrity that made his team fiercely loyal. They knew Mike wasn't performing for the camera. He was living what he preached. Behind every laugh and muddy handshake was a man driven by gratitude and grounded by humility. But as the years passed, those ideals and the unrelenting pace of the show began to test him in ways even he couldn't ignore. The cracks were starting to show, and soon the crew would witness the moment Mike finally hit his breaking point. After years of non-stop filming, travel, and physical punishment, Mike Rowe finally began to feel the weight of everything he'd endured. The dirt, the danger, and the endless pressure to deliver something real were taking a toll not just on his body, but on his spirit. Crew members started noticing subtle changes. The fatigue in his voice, the quiet moments when he'd sit alone after filming, staring out into the distance. One producer said, "He was still smiling for the camera, but you could tell something was cracking underneath." The schedule had become relentless. They were filming across multiple states within days, sleeping only a few hours at a time, often in freezing barns or sweltering factories. Mike never complained, but his body began to. There were episodes where he worked through severe back pain, bronchitis, and exhaustion. He'd push himself past his limit because he didn't want to disappoint anyone, said one crew member. But behind that commitment was a man reaching the edge of burnout. During the final years of the original run, Mike confided to his team that he felt trapped between the heart of the show and the demands of television. "It was never supposed to be about ratings," he said one night over dinner. "It was supposed to be about people." That conversation stuck with his crew, because it was the first time he had ever admitted he might walk away. When Dirty Jobs ended, in 2012, many fans assumed it was canceled because of ratings. But those close to him knew the truth. It was Mike's decision. He needed time to breathe, to step back from the chaos and rediscover what the show had truly meant. For him, Dirty Jobs had been more than entertainment. It had been a mission to restore respect for hard work. The years of danger, conflict, and emotion had changed him profoundly, and walking away was the only way to protect what he stood for. The crew supported him fully, even though they knew it was the end of an era. As one of them put it, he didn't quit, he evolved. What came next would prove that Mike Rowe's legacy was never just about getting dirty. It was about reminding America of the dignity in doing so. Years after the cameras stopped rolling, Mike Rowe's crew finally began speaking openly about what those years truly meant, and what they saw in the man who led them through it all. They said Dirty Jobs wasn't just a show. It was a life-changing experience that reshaped their view of work, humility, and resilience. "He showed us that dignity doesn't wear a suit," one cameraman said. "It wears overalls, gloves, and steel-toed boots." The crew described Mike as both leader and brother, someone who never asked for loyalty but earned it every day through action. They remember his ability to make them laugh when exhaustion hit, his calm voice in moments of danger, and his deep respect for the everyday Americans whose stories they told. Off-screen, Mike kept the mission alive through his foundation, Rowe Works, which provides scholarships and support for skilled trades. "That's the side of Mike most people never saw," one producer said. Even when the show ended, his message didn't. For the crew, their years together became a badge of honor. They had endured toxic fumes, collapsing tunnels, and sleepless nights. But they'd also witnessed something rare. A man who practiced everything he preached about hard work and gratitude. Many still keep photos from the road, mud-stained and faded, reminders of the days when they captured the heartbeat of working America. When asked what Mike's true legacy was, one longtime sound engineer said, "He didn't make dirty jobs famous. He made the people who do them matter." Today, Mike continues to speak for those unseen workers, reminding the world that real heroes don't chase fame.
Look, I'm not going to defend it. I think they've been ignorant of a lot of unintended consequences that come along with a lot of policies in play right now.
Right.
For decades, Mike Rowe has been the voice of hard work, humility, and blue-collar pride. But while millions watched him crawl through sewers and climb skyscrapers on dirty jobs, one mystery remained unsolved: his love life. Fans have speculated for years about the woman behind the man who built an empire on grit and honesty. Now, at 59, Mike Rowe's girlfriend has finally spoken out, confirming what many suspected all along. Her confession doesn't just reveal the truth about their private relationship. It exposes the side of Mike Rowe the cameras never caught. What she said left fans stunned, colleagues speechless, and even Mike himself emotional. Stay tuned, because what you're about to hear will forever change how you see one of America's most beloved TV hosts. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, because this story goes far deeper than anyone imagined. For years, Mike Rowe's charm, humor, and work ethic made him one of television's most relatable figures. Yet when it came to his private life, he built an invisible wall few could see through. Interviews, red carpets, and late-night appearances all ended the same way, with Mike gracefully dodging any question about romance. Fans grew convinced he'd chosen solitude over love, too busy crisscrossing America's back roads to settle down. But now, his longtime girlfriend has confirmed that wasn't the truth at all. The man who spent decades celebrating the everyday worker had someone quietly celebrating him behind the scenes. "He didn't hide me because he was ashamed," she explained. "He just wanted something of his own in a world where everything he did was public." Her voice trembled slightly when she said it, revealing the weight of years spent in silence. They first met long before Dirty Jobs turned Mike into a national icon. Back then, he was a Baltimore native with a captivating voice, hustling to make ends meet as a narrator and part-time host. "He wasn't rich or famous," she said with a nostalgic smile, "but he had that spark. You could tell he was destined for something bigger." Their connection wasn't instant fame or passion. It was built on humor, respect, and simplicity. Mike preferred small diners to fancy restaurants, quiet conversations to parties, and thoughtful gestures to grand displays. "He had this way of making you feel like the only person in the room," she recalled. "Even when he was dead tired, he'd listen like your words actually mattered." When Dirty Jobs exploded in popularity, everything changed. The grueling schedule, long travel days, and constant exposure strained their relationship. "He'd call from an oil rig or a sewage plant at 3 a.m. just to check in," she said. "Sometimes he'd fall asleep mid-sentence. But what kept them together wasn't passion, it was purpose. He believed in what he was doing," she added. "He saw dignity in the people the world ignored, and that passion was contagious." She watched from the sidelines as Mike transformed from a local host into a voice for blue-collar America. Yet fame, she says, never changed him. He's still the same man who fixes his own sink, laughs at his mistakes, and eats cold leftovers without complaint. Despite his growing recognition, Mike refused to exploit his relationship for publicity. He told me once, "If I open that door, they'll never let us close it again." That was enough for her. She accepted the quiet, the distance, and even the loneliness, understanding that what they had was something sacred in an industry built on exposure. And now, with her words confirming what fans had long suspected, that Mike Rowe wasn't a lifelong bachelor but a man devoted to one woman, the mystery is finally over. "He's always said some jobs are dirty," she laughed softly, "but protecting love in a world like his? That's the hardest job of all." For years, Mike Rowe's charm, humor, and work ethic made him one of television's most relatable figures. Yet when it came to his private life, he built an invisible wall few could see through. Interviews, red carpets, and late-night appearances all ended the same way, with Mike gracefully dodging any question about romance. Fans grew convinced he'd chosen solitude over love, too busy crisscrossing America's back roads to settle down. But now, his longtime girlfriend has confirmed that wasn't the truth at all. The man who spent decades celebrating the everyday worker had someone quietly celebrating him behind the scenes. "He didn't hide me because he was ashamed," she explained. "He just wanted something of his own in a world where everything he did was public." Her voice trembled slightly when she said it, revealing the weight of years spent in silence. They first met long before Dirty Jobs turned Mike into a national icon. Back then, he was a Baltimore native with a captivating voice, hustling to make ends meet as a narrator and part-time host. "He wasn't rich or famous," she said with a nostalgic smile, "but he had that spark. You could tell he was destined for something bigger." Their connection wasn't instant fame or passion. It was built on humor, respect, and simplicity. Mike preferred small diners to fancy restaurants, quiet conversations to parties, and thoughtful gestures to grand displays. "He had this way of making you feel like the only person in the room," she recalled. "Even when he was dead tired, he'd listen like your words actually mattered." When Dirty Jobs exploded in popularity, everything changed. The grueling schedule, long travel days, and constant exposure strained their relationship. He'd call from an oil rig or a sewage plant at 3 a.m. just to check in, she said. Sometimes he'd fall asleep mid-sentence. But what kept them together wasn't passion. It was purpose. "He believed in what he was doing," she added. "He saw dignity in the people the world ignored, and that passion was contagious." She watched from the sidelines as Mike transformed from a local host into a voice for blue-collar America. Yet fame, she says, never changed him. He's still the same man who fixes his own sink, laughs at his mistakes, and eats cold leftovers without complaint. Despite his growing recognition, Mike refused to exploit his relationship for publicity. He told me once, "If I open that door, they'll never let us close it again." That was enough for her. She accepted the quiet, the distance, and even the loneliness, understanding that what they had was something sacred in an industry built on exposure. And now, with her words confirming what fans had long suspected, that Mike Rowe wasn't a lifelong bachelor but a man devoted to one woman, the mystery is finally over. "He's always said some jobs are dirty," she laughed softly, "but protecting love in a world like his? That's the hardest job of all. When Dirty Jobs first premiered, Mike Rowe had no idea it would consume his life for the next decade. Every week brought a new challenge, working underground with miners, inside fish factories, or deep in the mud alongside sewer workers. Viewers loved the show's raw honesty, but few realized the toll it took on him personally. He was constantly traveling, his girlfriend admitted. Different states, different time zones. Sometimes I wouldn't see him for months. She said that despite the physical distance, their connection remained unshakable because Mike made a point to call her every night, no matter how tired he was. He'd fall asleep mid-sentence sometimes, but he always called. That's just who he is. What kept their relationship strong wasn't glamour, it was loyalty. He'd always say, "If you can survive the dirt, you can survive anything." And I think he meant that in more ways than one. She revealed that even when the fame hit hard and people started recognizing him everywhere, he never acted differently. He never used the word fans, she explained. He always called them friends I haven't met yet. That humility is real. But while Mike was out there highlighting America's hardest workers, he was quietly battling exhaustion behind the scenes. He'd come home sore, bruised, sometimes sick, and I'd beg him to rest, she said. But Mike's not wired that way. He believes that if people are out there doing the real work, he doesn't have the right to complain. That relentless dedication became both his greatest strength and his biggest burden. She recalled one night when he came home after filming in a freezing factory, barely able to move. He sat on the couch, covered in grime, and said, "I don't know if I can keep doing this." But then he smiled and said, "But someone has to." That's Mike, always putting others first. She admitted that there were moments she wanted him to slow down, to think of himself for once, but he couldn't. He feels a responsibility to represent people who never get thanked for their work. He carries that weight with pride. Even though the distance was painful, she said she wouldn't change a thing. "I fell in love with his purpose as much as I fell in love with him," she confessed. "He's not perfect. He can be stubborn, distracted, and lost in thought. But when you see how much he cares about people, you realize he's exactly where he's meant to be." What most don't know is that during those long stretches apart, they wrote each other letters. Not texts, not emails, actual letters, she revealed. He said it made the connection feel real, like something worth keeping. Those letters, she says, are still tucked away in a box in her home. A quiet reminder that even when fame pulled him away, his heart never left. For Mike Rowe, hard work isn't just a job. It's a love language, and for her, loving him meant understanding that. As Mike Rowe's fame grew, so did the expectations placed on his shoulders. Networks wanted more shows, producers wanted more episodes, and fans wanted more access to his life. Yet behind the scenes, his girlfriend saw the cracks forming. He'd get home, collapse on the couch, and just stare at the ceiling, she said softly. He never complained, but I could tell he was running on fumes. For someone who spent years shining a light on others, Mike rarely took time for himself. He always felt guilty resting, she explained. He'd say, "There's a guy out there laying asphalt in 110-degree heat. I can't justify sleeping in." That's how deeply he respects hard work. But that same devotion often left him emotionally drained. He carried the weight of every story he filmed. The farmers struggling to survive, the miners risking their lives, the men and women who worked unseen and unappreciated. He'd wake up at night sometimes and just talk about them, she said. He remembered their names, their families, their struggles. He couldn't turn it off. His girlfriend revealed that at one point, their relationship nearly reached a breaking point. He was giving everything to the world and nothing to himself, she said. I told him, "You can't pour from an empty cup." But Mike struggled with the idea of slowing down. He saw his work as a calling, not a career. He'd tell me, "If I stop, people forget the message. They go back to ignoring the ones who keep this country running." That sense of duty, while noble, came at a price. He missed birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries. But what hurt her most was how much it hurt him. He'd send me pictures from hotel rooms or airport lounges, just saying, "Wish you were here." It broke my heart, because I knew he meant it. Still, she understood what drove him. He never wanted fame. He wanted connection, she said. He wanted people to look at a garbage collector or a farmer and say, "That's honorable." That kind of purpose doesn't fade easily, and she learned to love him through it. "You can't love Mike Rowe halfway," she laughed. "You either understand the mission or you don't." Over time, she became not just his partner, but his balance. The one person who reminded him that even heroes need rest. He'd come home covered in dirt and grease, and I'd tell him, "You don't have to prove anything today. You're home." That always made him smile. There were moments when Mike considered walking away from television altogether. He'd say, "Maybe I've done enough. Maybe it's time to disappear for a while." But then someone would send him a letter, a kid who wanted to be a welder, a father teaching his son about hard work. And that would pull him right back in. He couldn't turn his back on that. Through it all, she never stopped believing in him. "He's the kind of man who feels other people's pain more than his own," she said. "And that's beautiful. But it's also heavy." When asked what she thought people misunderstood most about him, her answer came without hesitation. "They think he's untouchable. They see confidence, humor, and charm. But behind that, he's incredibly human, gentle, self-doubting, and deeply loyal. That humanity," she says, "is what made her stay all these years." "He may not be home every night," she smiled, "but his heart always is." As the years rolled on, the world saw Mike Rowe as an unstoppable force, a man who made America laugh while reminding it to respect the workers who built it. But behind that fearless image was a man who constantly battled burnout, loneliness, and the pressure of being the voice for millions. His girlfriend revealed that the toughest part wasn't the distance, it was watching him carry burdens that weren't his to bear. He'd read messages from fans who said his show changed their lives, she said. He'd be grateful, but also heavy-hearted. He felt responsible for living up to that image every day. She described nights where he'd quietly sit on the porch, sipping coffee long after midnight, reflecting on the people he'd met, the welders, miners, and fishermen who reminded him what real work looked like. He never saw himself as famous, she said. He saw himself as lucky. Still, the isolation took its toll. There were moments when he'd come home, sit beside me, and just go silent. He didn't need to talk. He just needed peace. Mike wasn't someone who sought comfort through attention. He found it through stillness. His girlfriend understood that his silence was never distance. It was recovery. "He carries the noise of every job he's ever done," she said softly. "The noise of machines, laughter, exhaustion, and life. When he's home, he finally lets it go." Despite everything, she said, Mike always put her first in the quietest ways. He'd leave notes before leaving for a shoot. Just small things. See you soon. Or, don't forget to smile today. Those gestures meant more than grand declarations ever could. What fans never saw, she revealed, was how fiercely protective he was of her privacy. He told me once, "I'm the one who signed up for this life, not you." He meant it. For years, she remained anonymous, supporting him quietly, loving him without recognition. But now, after decades of silence, she's proud to finally say what many have long suspected. Mike Rowe isn't just the face of hard work. He's the embodiment of loyalty, gratitude, and love that endures when the cameras stop rolling. Mike Rowe's girlfriend's decision to finally speak wasn't made lightly. For nearly 2 decades, she had watched him live 2 lives, the man adored by millions on screen, and the quiet soul who came home craving nothing but peace. "Mike doesn't perform when the cameras are off," she said. "What you see on television, that humor, humility, and curiosity, that's him, completely." Yet, what surprised most people was the depth of self-doubt he carried. He never saw himself as a celebrity, she explained. He saw himself as a messenger. He often told her that fame made him uncomfortable because it distracted from the people whose stories truly mattered. He'd say, "I'm not the star, they are." That humility, while admirable, sometimes made life harder for him. He'd turn down lavish appearances and celebrity galas just to attend a friend's retirement party or volunteer at a local trade school. He'd rather shake hands with a welder than take a photo with an actor, she laughed. That grounded nature is what made her fall in love with him all over again each year. He doesn't chase attention. He earns respect, she said firmly. Still, being the partner of a man so admired came with its challenges. She described the strange feeling of walking through airports unnoticed while fans surrounded him, shouting his name. He'd always find me in the crowd and wink. It was his way of saying, "I'm still here with you." Through fame, distance, and relentless schedules, their bond only deepened because they never let fame rewrite who they were. "We built our world on honesty and laughter," she revealed. "He's the same man who helps old ladies carry groceries and thanks every waiter by name." Even now, as people continue to speculate about his private life, she insists the truth is simple. Mike Rowe's success never changed him. It only amplified who he already was. "He doesn't need a mansion or a spotlight to feel fulfilled," she said softly. "He needs good people, good stories, and a reason to wake up every morning." And now that she's finally spoken, fans have begun to understand that the secret behind Mike's enduring appeal isn't mystery, it's authenticity. He's the rare kind of man whose legacy isn't built on fame, but on the quiet, unshakable truth of who he really is. As Mike Rowe's career evolved, so did the way he viewed life, fame, and love. After years of constant travel, sleepless nights, and grueling shoots, he finally decided to slow down. Not because he was tired of working, but because he realized what truly mattered. He told me one day, "I think I've spent more time with strangers than with myself," his girlfriend revealed. That realization became a turning point. Mike began taking long breaks between projects, spending more time at home, and reconnecting with the quiet things that brought him peace: music, writing, and reflection. He'd sit on the porch with his guitar for hours, just strumming old country songs, she said. "That's when I saw the happiest version of him." Away from the cameras, Mike Rowe wasn't the confident host everyone knew. He was a thoughtful, observant man who valued solitude more than spotlight. He'd still get calls from producers asking him to return to TV full-time, but he'd always say, "Not yet. I'm where I need to be." His girlfriend says that's when their relationship entered its strongest phase. Without the constant chaos of filming, they rediscovered each other in the simple rhythms of normal life, cooking dinner together, going on drives, and laughing about how absurd fame could be. He'd joke that the only thing dirtier than a job is show business, she laughed. And he meant it. But underneath the humor, Mike carried gratitude for everything the show had brought him. "He doesn't regret a thing," she said. "He just finally learned to breathe." Fans who met him during this time often described him as calm, centered, and more grounded than ever before. "He's not chasing a legacy," she explained. "He's living one." When asked if he ever talks about marriage, she smiled knowingly. "Mike's never been the type to follow timelines. What we have is real, and that's enough for both of us." She believes that's the ultimate secret behind his enduring peace. Authentic love, built quietly, without validation, without headlines. "He's the man who could walk away from Hollywood tomorrow and be completely content," she said. "Because what fulfills him now isn't a camera, it's connection, purpose, and the life we've built together, away from the noise." Now, with his girlfriend's words finally out in the open, the mystery surrounding Mike Rowe has come full circle. The truth is simple yet powerful. He never needed fame to define him, and he never needed to prove himself to the world. What fans admired about Mike all these years wasn't just his humor or his fearlessness. It was his honesty. "He doesn't pretend to be anyone he's not," she said. "He's exactly the same man at home as he is on camera." Her confirmation silenced years of speculation and reminded everyone why Mike Rowe remains one of the most respected figures in television. He built a career on showing America that real heroes wear hard hats, not suits. And he built a life grounded in gratitude and love that never needed publicity to be real. "He's always said success means nothing if you lose your soul," she added quietly. And Mike never did. Today, at 59, he stands as proof that authenticity still matters, that love doesn't need to be flaunted, and that true character never fades. The revelation from his girlfriend didn't expose a scandal. It revealed the kind of story Hollywood rarely tells anymore. A man who stayed humble, faithful, and true to everything he believed in. And now that she's finally confirmed what fans suspected all along, one thing is certain: Mike Rowe's greatest work has never been on television. It's the life he's quietly built behind the scenes, with the woman who knew him long before the world did.